Greetings and welcome to another episode of Businesstalk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Corey Crossan, Research and Teaching Fellow at the Oxford Character Project, as our esteemed guest on today's podcast episode. Dr. Corey develops and delivers programs that strengthen character among students, professionals, and academic communities. Her research investigates how character is formed and how it shapes both individual performance and overall well-being. With a background in exercise science, Dr. Corey brings a unique perspective to her work, integrating principles of habit formation and physical training into the study of daily character practice. Her approach is grounded in both personal experience and academic inquiry, shaped by her years as an elite athlete, including competition at the NCAA Division First level. Dr. Corey's passion for allied performance has evolved into a commitment to helping individuals and organizations pursue sustainable excellence through character-based leadership. She is also the co-founder of Virtue City Character, a mobile application designed to support intentional, everyday practice of a character and leadership development. She earned both her MA and PhD in Kinesiology Leadership from Western University. In this episode, Dr. Corey Crossan offers thought-provoking insights from a research publication, The Practice of Developing Leader Character to Elevate Judgment. So without further delay, let's welcome Dr. Corey Crossan to the podcast. Dr. Corey, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Dr. Corey, why is character beyond competencies or personality so critical for effective leadership and sound judgment, particularly in high-stakes environment?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And this idea that oftentimes we've really prioritized competencies, those are kind of hardwired into everything that we do. But when we really got started on this research back in 2008, 2009 with the global financial crisis, a group of researchers at the Ivy Business School, one of them being my mom, Mary Crossan, Gerard Seitz, and Jeffrey Gantz, they realized that the failures in leadership in that time weren't because of failures in competency, but they were failures in character. And so, but no one really knew what character was. They couldn't really put a finger on it. So a lot of research since then has been understanding what character is and how that actually influences judgment and decision making. Character goes back really far to, across the East and West, including Confucius, Aristotle. But there's essentially this idea that there's this kind of meta virtue called practical wisdom, which we call in our research judgment. And it's this idea that all of these virtues work together to influence a habit of judgment and decision making. I've been working on an analogy recently on this idea. If you picture playing in an orchestra, how if you have the conductor is it's similar to your judgment. It has to know when to pull in the different instruments to play, music that sounds good. But without all of the different instruments, like your strings or your percussion, those are like the different virtues that we need to call on. Without that kind of collective ensemble, your judgment or the orchestra or the conductor kind of falls apart there. And so it's this idea that a character-based judgment calls on this collective of behaviors such as humility, humanity, accountability, temperance, drive that influence a habit of judgment and decision making that help our competencies as well. So it's not that we don't care about competencies, we need them, but they're insufficient. And so that's where we bring character into the mix. I think you also touched on personality. So I think personality is really interesting. There's a lot of interest in organizations on hiring kind of complementary personalities. And to me, it's been a less interesting field of study because for more or less, your personality is set. You're kind of born with personality. You might have it activated in different ways at different times. But character, it can be developed. You can change it. You can strengthen it. And so that's what I've been really interested in the character area is that we can strengthen this habit of judgment and decision making.
Very insightful. Your chapter emphasizes Aristotle's notion of virtue as a balance between deficiency and excess. Can you share an example where a strength taken to excess become a liability in leadership?
Yeah, so I'll share two examples. I'll share one that really got me into the character area, and then I'll share one that's more leadership context specific. So, as you mentioned in my bio in the opening, I used to be an athlete. I thought I wanted to be a professional golfer for most of my life. And this athletic kind of endeavor is really what got me interested in character from a performance standpoint. And so for me, the character framework that we work with has these 11 dimensions. And what happens is that they can become what you alluded to, an excess vice. So strengths can kind of have this negative impact if they're unsupported by other dimensions. So for me, drive is a dimension that's been really strong for me throughout my life. But what I didn't realize is that it was becoming an excess vice in the sense that I had this striving for excellence appetite, but it started becoming a striving for perfection. And pretty much, I haven't really seen anywhere where perfection actually exists. And so what happened was, as I'm golfing, I started getting a lot of anxiety because I was expecting perfection. I was trying for perfection, but in reality, I knew mistakes were going to happen. So I was setting myself up for failure. And so what was happening is I started doubling down on, oh, I need more drive, I need more accountability. But what I actually needed was better support from other dimensions that I hadn't strengthened, like my humility, to know that mistakes are going to happen, to embrace those to help me grow from them. And so this is the idea that your strengths can become those excess vices, but you don't want to dial down those strengths. You want to look for other dimensions to better support it. So maybe a quick example in the leadership context right now, some of my strengths include transcendence and drive. So I have a lot of ideas and I want to go quickly, but my weaker dimensions still include things like humility, sometimes humanity, collaboration. And what happens is if you're going so fast and you're trying to go, create these ideas, but you're not including other people in the co-creation of those ideas, you're not bringing people along, you're not listening to the voices of others, you're actually going to find yourself quite isolated. And so those strengths that you thought were so important for leadership actually start backfiring and isolating you so that you don't have followers.
Dr. Corey, you propose a process model of leader character development. Could you walk us through the key components of that model and how they interact to inform practical wisdom?
Yes. So in the book chapter, we've actually developed this process model a little bit, but it's still mainly the same. So the idea is that we essentially have kind of character in the middle or the core of which practical wisdom is embedded, or judgment is the kind of the embedded piece of character. And then on both sides of that, we have what we call antecedents to judgment or character development. And then we have outcomes of that. So on the left-hand side, the antecedents, the developed model of it is that we essentially have 7 strategies for character development that influence the development of character. And so this was the research that really, a lot of it came out of the Oxford Character Project where I'm at now. And so that includes things like using the language of character, reflecting on character, habituating character, using reminders for character, looking to exemplars for character, paying attention to the systems that you're within, and then friendships. So when we're trying to develop character, it's hard to do this on your own, and actually doing this with other people, learning from other people helps us develop our character. We have theories and frameworks embedded within those, which I'll probably get to a little bit later if we have time. But a quick kind of one of I think the really important ones is we talk about the 5 stages of development. So when we talk about habituating character, there are 5 stages that help us scaffold our habitual learning. So those all help us strengthen different parts of character, which ultimately help us strengthen our judgment. And what are the outcomes of that? So that leads to what we kind of bucket as flourishing, which includes high performance, good well-being, good relationships. They don't have to be an either or. They actually all result as a positive outcome from character. And then within those, there are feedback loops. So when you perform better, it better helps the development of your character because you feel good. But unfortunately, sometimes you can have a vicious cycle where if you're not developing your character, it's leading to poor outcomes. It then undermines your ability to develop character.
The chapter introduces the idea of interconnected character dimensions. How do these dimensions work together, and why is their interdependence essential for exercising sound judgment?
Yeah, so it's really fun to see, the framework. It does such a good job of showing how all these dimensions are interrelated and ultimately influence judgment and decision making in the middle. But it's definitely not a new idea. And actually, a lot of other, scholars or practitioners even bring in this idea without explicitly talking about it. So, for example, Brené Brown has done a bunch of wonderful work on the power of vulnerability, but she also talks about the courage that we need to be vulnerable. And so, as you do a deep dive into these, these strengths or these virtues, we always need the development of other virtues to support whatever we're working on. And then back to my other example too about how our strengths can operate as excess vices. They need the support of other dimensions to make sure they're not tipping into that excess vice state. If you look back to the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, which I was talking about earlier, a lot of the poor judgment and decision making then could have been characterized by a lot of courage, right? A lot of confidence, determination, but without that being supported by dimensions like humility, that decision making becomes reckless, it becomes arrogant. So we need all of those strengths. And it's really interesting. It is showing up in our research. I'm actually just working on an article right now where if you only focus on a few of these dimensions, if you have a short program, you do see other dimensions strengthening. And one of the ones that seems to strengthen a lot, even though we don't focus on it, is temperance. And so in one of our programs, we focused on humanity, developing compassion and empathy. And you can see how that would start to then strengthen your temperance, being patient, calm, and composed. As you develop more care for others, it creates more of this space between, the stimulus that people are giving to you and how you want to react. So I'm starting to call that the virtue spillover effect.
What role do habits and deliberate practice play in the development of leader character over time? Can character be trained like a muscle?
Yes, yeah, so definitely. So essentially, character is made up of a set of dispositions or habits of the way that we think, feel, and act. So because these are habits, they can change over time. And the important thing is that they can change for better or for worse. I think a lot of people think that character and therefore judgment improves over time with experience, and it certainly can, but it can actually atrophy or erode over time, just like your muscles can. And so the idea is that we're trying to really put in place these strategies or systems to help people make sure that their character and their judgment is developing for the better. And so just like with muscles, if you want to go to the gym and strengthen your bicep muscle, you have to kind of put in the reps, the exercises. Same thing with your character. It's exercising. If you want to become more courageous, it's actually doing more acts of being courageous. But what I talked about earlier around those 5 stages of development, I think is a really important part to consider as you're trying to strengthen these character muscles. And it's very similar to an exercise science approach, which was my undergrad expertise. So when you start working out for the first time, or if you want to run a marathon for the first time, you're not just going to go, your coach isn't going to tell you to go run a marathon. You have to start running in small amounts, make sure that you're progressing over time. And as your body adapts, you become stronger and you can do more. Same thing with character, is we've created these stages of development that help scaffold learning and development. And then as you get more comfortable in those areas, you can strengthen. So those stages are actually just discovering, what does your character look like? The second one is then now that you know what your character looks like, and actually, if you use back to that exercise analogy, it's important to know what your muscles are before you actually start strengthening them. That certainly helps. And then after that, you learn how to activate them. So, like, just like you learn how to activate a muscle, how do you learn to activate that feeling of bravery? If you haven't been brave in a long time, how do you find what that feels like? And are there resources you can use, like music, to help you activate that bravery? Then our stage three is exercising character. So it's actually doing exercises to strengthen that. One of my favorite ones is, and I think I mentioned this in the book chapter, it's around if you want to develop your collaboration, you can use a very simple exercise from improv called yes and. So during your conversations throughout the day, try and use yes and language to develop your collaboration. And then the fourth stage is looking at how your character is interconnected to other dimensions. So what we've already touched on. And then the fifth one is looking at how does your character hold up across contexts? Are you more accountable at work and you're less accountable at home with the chores? And how can you then strengthen your accountability in those contexts that it's less accountable to? So that scaffolding becomes really helpful.
Dr. Corey, in your view, what are the most overlooked or misunderstood aspects of cultivating character in leadership development programs today?
Hmm. Well, I think because you mentioned leadership programs and character is still missing from a lot of leadership programs. So that would be like the first piece is we often focus on what leaders do, that competency side, but we forget to focus on who the leader is to enable them to do those competencies. So it's just actually first starting with the fact that we need to bring character more into leadership development. And as soon as you make that case, there then becomes a domino effect of how we actually need to train or change our training systems. So, because competencies and skills are developed in a different way than character, character is a habit and it transcends context. And so, you start to then look at the fact that it can't just be a one off workshop where you learn the skill and you're expected to kind of keep that going. Character is a lifetime journey. And so, when you start to think about programs, it has to be beyond a one time workshop. And it actually has to be beyond just simply having workshops every once in a while to actually how do you give people the tools and resources to embed this into their daily lives, going beyond just the classroom training style, but actually practicing character in the micro moments of everything you do. And so with that, we've really leveraged the tech side of things because if you need to be able to develop character in everything that you do, it needs to be a lot more accessible. And so tech helps bring that accessibility. And character isn't, it's not very prominent right now. So we've also put a lot of our expertise into the app that you mentioned in the bio, Virtuosity Character, that enables people to learn from their phones. It also, the tech enables us to customize development as well, which is really important for character because none of us have the same character. And then I would say a lot of times in leadership development programs, we're still missing that evidence-based approach. So what is it that we're actually trying to do and are we delivering on those aims? And so that's what we really bring really intentionally into our programs. And again, the tech really helps us understand what are people actually doing? Are they doing the daily exercises or not? And how is that affecting their character, their judgment, and decision making? And then lastly, I would say a lot of leadership development programs may neglect the fuller kind of systems around them. So, if you go through a development program, are you really able to sustain that beyond the program? And if you think about organizations doing leadership development programs, what are the systems you can create around those programs to better support the people, whether it's the time that they're in those programs or when they get out of those programs, will they have the support systems to continue doing what they've learned in the program?
You mentioned that character can operate in deficiency or excess. How can leaders become aware of their own imbalances and what tools or practices help them self correct?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a forever journey, like I mentioned, but I think the really kind of initial start is going back to those five stages that I talked about in terms of scaffolding. And so the first stage is discovering what your character looks like. So we have the character framework, but we also have within that, so there's 62 behaviors or virtues. And all of those have a deficient vice, meaning that the virtue is underdeveloped, or an excess vice, meaning that the virtue is strong but unsupported. So we actually have an index for all of those. Maybe we can link that in the show notes or something like that to help the listeners look at that index. And it's just trying to use that language more. Mary Crossan, who does a lot of research on this, she's also my mom. She has a really nice analogy that talks about it's like putting on a set of glasses that helps you see the world differently. And one of the strategies that we use is the language strategy. So it's actually adopting these new terms of virtue and vice to examine what your behavior looks like, really start to open up a new kind of framework for understanding yourself. And that's the first step. But understanding what your virtues and vices are isn't necessarily going to make them any different. And so that's where you have to go to the next stages around activating and strengthening your character to shift those vices into virtues.
What practical applications or interventions have proven most effective in helping individuals and organizations embed strong character into their cultures?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think when I think about the success cases, it always starts with the people that are interested in it. And so when you think about organizations wanting to bring character into them, it can't just be about, oh, I think this would be good for my organization and I'm going to pass this on to somebody else. Everyone has to start with character in themselves. And so I would say the development piece is like a bedrock of whatever embedding application you have. And as you start developing your own character, you strengthen that judgment. You then start to see what are the levers or the systems that we can change in our organization to better support this ongoing, development of character. So you can think about things like hiring people on character. You can think about promoting people more intentionally on character. You can think of a more kind of focus on developing a culture of character. But all of that is dependent on the development of character in yourself. And so related to that, I do think it's also really important that it does have to start at the top. You have to have buy-in from the leaders at the top, or else it's such an uphill battle to actually embed this really, really well into organizations. And I think maybe the other thing that I didn't get to yet is that not just development kind of in some parts of the organization, it has to be across the entire organization. And so you could do it in steps where you might start with, the leadership team, and it starts to trickle down throughout the organization. But that's where the tech has become really important, because if you want to scale something as personal as character, you have to be able to scale that across an entire organization. And so tech really helps bring everyone on the same page in that way.
Dr. Corey, I would like to conclude with one last question. Looking ahead, what research directions or real world applications most excite you when it comes to deepening our understanding of character based leadership?
Yeah, so I've always been really interested in like the practice side of character. So all of the theory that we learn in character, it has to serve the practice. It has to serve people to actually be able to develop their character, and really keen on looking how it can be embedded into organizations, because I really do believe organizations can be drivers of social good. And so when you think about that, I've talked a lot about theory today, but I've hinted at that virtuosity app. And that to me is the really important piece, is that all of this theory I've talked about is operationalized into an app. It's not just theoretical, it becomes really practical. And I think that's really important to marry up those two, because there's also a lot of devices out there that aren't empirically based. And so it's really this rich relationship between evidence-based approaches, but something that's really practical. And related to that note, and with the tech, it's how do we scale this? How do we enable large organizations, multiple organizations across the world, to be able to do this well? And so actually one specific project that we're working on right now is we're doing like a train the trainer model, where we have some people going through our virtuosity program, and they're then tasked to bring it back to their larger teams. And so I'm really interested from a research standpoint is what's the efficacy of how their learning and development translates to their group. And we have two hypotheses that are very different. It could be either that, there's some kind of atrophy or drop off because they aren't the experts and they're going to kind of maybe leave something out. And this is the first time they're doing, leading a program. But the other hypothesis that I think is a lot more exciting is that because they're bringing it within their organizations, within their team, who have a shared vision, who have shared interests, who share the same context, that the types of discussions and conversations that they have become much more rich, and that it actually becomes an even more successful program than the one that I would have led with them. So we'll have to stay tuned on that to see what happens. But this kind of ripple effect of the train the trainer is something that we're really excited to explore.
Dr. Corey, thank you so much for such a rich and thought-provoking conversation. Your insights into the development of leader character and the nuanced understanding of how virtues and even their deficiencies or excesses impact judgment offer a powerful lens for anyone interested in leadership, well-being, and sustained excellence. From your journey as an elite athlete to your scholarly work and practical innovations like Virtuosity Character, your commitment to building stronger leaders through daily character practice is truly inspiring. We are grateful for the depth and clarity you have brought to this important topic. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast, and we hope to continue learning from more work in the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.